My parents sold my late grandmother's house behind my back. It was supposed to be mine. I, 27F, grew up in a small town where my grandmother's house was basically the center of the universe. It was the one constant thing in my life. A little yellow house with peeling paint, creaky wooden floors, and a smell that was somehow equal parts lavender and old paper. When I was a kid, that house was my safe place. My parents fought a lot, mostly about money, but Grandma's house was where the noise stopped. She'd make tea, listen to my stories, and tell me that this house will always be yours one day, sweetheart, a place where you can start over if life gets too heavy. I believed her. In high school, when my dad lost his job and we had to move into an apartment, I basically lived with Grandma full-time. I helped her with groceries, cleaned the garden, and stayed by her side when her arthritis got worse. Even in college, I came home every weekend just to mow the lawn and make sure she wasn't alone. Everyone, and I mean everyone, in the family knew that I was the one who took care of her. My cousins never visited. My parents only came by on holidays. It was just me and her, always. When Grandma passed away 2 years ago, I was devastated but also strangely at peace because she had been very open with me about her will. She told me directly that she wanted me to have the house. I never asked for it. She insisted, "You earned it, love. You kept it alive." After the funeral, things started getting weird. My parents were quiet, almost too quiet. I figured they were grieving in their own way, so I didn't push. But when I asked about the will, my dad brushed me off with a quick, "We'll handle it, don't worry." At first, I didn't. I trusted them. Then one day, I drove past Grandma's street and there was a for sale sign in front of her house. I thought it had to be a mistake. I literally parked my car, got out, and stood there like an idiot, staring at the sign with this numb buzzing in my head. I called my mom immediately. She sounded annoyed, not surprised. "Oh, honey, yes, we sold it. We needed to settle some debts," and I don't even remember the rest of what she said because everything inside me just cracked. That house wasn't just property. It was Grandma's legacy. It was her promise to me, and they'd sold it behind my back. I couldn't sleep that night. My chest felt tight, like someone had stacked bricks over it. I kept replaying my mom's words. We needed to settle some debts. Debt? My parents were always terrible with money, sure, but this wasn't theirs to sell. Grandma's house was supposed to be mine. Every memory, every Christmas morning, every lazy Sunday spent in that creaky kitchen. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was my inheritance. And suddenly it was gone. The next morning, I tried to act normal, but my hands kept trembling as I poured cereal into a bowl. My dad sat across from me at the tiny kitchen table, reading the newspaper like nothing had happened. I finally snapped. "Why did you sell Grandma's house?" I asked, my voice higher than I intended. He looked up slowly, his face tight. "A lot of things, kiddo," he said. "No, Dad, I mean it." "Why? That house wasn't yours to sell. Grandma made it clear it was mine." He sighed, put down the paper, and leaned back in his chair. "Look, we're not proud of it, but we had no choice." "No choice?" I shouted. "You always have a choice. You could have told me. You could have asked me." My mom appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "We did what we had to do," she said. "You weren't in a position to take it anyway. You're 27, living paycheck to paycheck. This was bigger than just a house." I stared at her, completely frozen. I wanted to say something, but the words got stuck somewhere between rage and disbelief. Living paycheck to paycheck? That was exactly why I had kept Grandma's house. So I'd have security, a safety net that she trusted me with. And they had stolen that under the guise of helping the family. I didn't sleep for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the house, the chipped yellow paint, the swing in the backyard, the way the sunlight hit the living room in the morning. It was gone, and there was nothing I could do. Finally, I decided to look up the sale records online. I needed proof. My hands shook as I typed in the address, heart hammering with a mix of hope and dread. There it was, my parents' names listed as the sellers. Not some legal complication, not a temporary hold. They had signed everything themselves. I called my grandma's lawyer, an older man who had always been kind to me. I asked him why I hadn't been contacted. Why had the will not been executed according to Grandma's wishes? He sighed, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. "Your parents handled the estate without informing you. Legally, there are loopholes, but morally, you're right. They went against your grandmother's intentions." Hearing it from someone outside the family hit me like a punch in the gut. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a complete erasure of my role in Grandma's life. I felt dizzy, nauseous, like the air had been sucked out of the room. The confrontation with my parents escalated that evening. I tried to keep it calm at first. I sat them down and said, "We need to talk about this. I want to understand why you did it." Mom shook her head. "There's nothing to understand. We did it." I felt my throat tighten. "You took something that wasn't yours, something you promised Grandma you'd respect. Did you even think about me?" Dad looked down, silent. Then he muttered something that made me laugh bitterly through tears. "We thought we were protecting you from having to deal with all the hassle." "Protecting me?" I scoffed. "You sold my future, my home, the place I grew up with. You didn't protect me. You erased me." The words hung in the kitchen, heavy and sharp. My parents looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't just about greed. It was about control. They had always wanted to decide what was best for me, and this was the ultimate assertion of power. I left the house that night and walked to the park near Grandma's old place. The street was quiet. The for sale sign swayed gently in the wind. I felt a surge of grief that made me want to scream, but all I could do was sit on the bench and cry. I replayed every memory I had of that house, baking cookies, folding laundry, sitting on the porch swing, and each one felt like it was being pulled from me. Somewhere Somewhere in the middle of my tears, I realized I had to make a choice. I could either go scorched earth, lawyer up, and fight my parents, or I could try to understand why they did this and figure out a way to salvage what was left of my family. I didn't know which path to take. That night, I sent a text to my best friend. I don't even know who my parents are anymore. She called almost immediately. Ayan, breathe. You're going to get through this. You always do. But you need to decide what matters more, the house or your own sanity. Her words haunted me. They were right. I had to think about my next step, but thinking about it meant facing them again, looking at the people I trusted most in my life and realizing they had chosen money over me. It was a line drawn in the sand, and I wasn't sure I knew which side I belonged to anymore. I didn't talk to my parents for a few days after that confrontation. I spent most of my time walking around my old neighborhood, sitting on Grandma's favorite bench, and scrolling through photos on my phone. Every picture of her yellow house made me ache. The living room with the sun pouring through the windows, the backyard garden she tended with such care, the tiny kitchen table where she used to pour me tea and tell me stories. Finally, curiosity and anger got the better of me. I decided to dig deeper. I called my dad's bank first, trying to understand what debts they were supposedly settling. Of course, they wouldn't give me details. I wasn't an account holder. But it led me to something else. Court records showing multiple liens, unpaid taxes, and small claims cases stacked against both my parents. It hit me like a wave. This wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment decision. They were drowning in money problems. They weren't just bad with money. They were in deep, serious debt, and Grandma's house had been the only way to cover even part of it. I sat down with my laptop and tried to make sense of it all. The numbers were staggering. Credit cards maxed out, loans overdue, even some medical bills piling up. Selling Grandma's house had probably covered all of it, maybe even prevented bankruptcy. But still, that didn't change how betrayed I felt. The next day, I called my grandmother's lawyer again. I explained what I'd found. He sighed deeply, almost like he had expected this. Ayan, he said gently, I've known your parents for years. They've always been in financial trouble. Legally, they were within their rights to sell the property under certain conditions. Morally, it's a disaster. Disaster is an understatement, I said bitterly. They promised me that house. They promised Grandma too. He paused. Look, I don't want to excuse what they did, but it seems they thought they were saving the family from ruin. It doesn't make it right, but it might explain why. I couldn't believe I was even listening to a defense for them, but deep down I needed to understand. I needed to know if there was a shred of reason behind the betrayal. Later that evening, I decided to go back to the house, the yellow one I used to call my own. The sold sign was gone, replaced with a new occupied notice. I peeked through the windows. Inside, everything was still there. The furniture, the curtains, even the smell of lavender somehow lingered faintly. It wasn't mine, but it still felt like home. Walking around the backyard, I thought about Grandma. I remembered how she had hugged me tightly and whispered, "Life is messy, but you'll find your way. Love." Maybe she had known that family would disappoint me, but that I would survive anyway. I finally called my mom. I don't know why I did it. Part of me wanted answers, part of me wanted to yell, and part of me just wanted to hear her voice. She picked up on the third ring. "Ayan," she said, wary. "Are you okay? Do you even realize what you did?" I asked. "Do you understand what it feels like to have something that was promised to you just taken?" Mom was quiet for a long time. Then finally she said, I know it was wrong, but Ayan, you have to understand we were drowning. Every bill, every loan, everything. We didn't see another way. We thought we were protecting the family, including you." I felt my anger twist into something heavier, harder to unpack. Protecting me? They destroyed the very thing Grandma promised me to protect me. Do you even understand how it feels to lose that trust? I said softly, almost to myself. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm sorry. We made a terrible mistake. We should have talked to you. We should have asked. We didn't, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." It wasn't enough. Not even close. But hearing her admit it, truly admit it, was something I didn't expect. The next few weeks were tense. I avoided visiting their apartment, stayed mostly at my own place or at friends' houses, but I couldn't stop thinking about the bigger picture. My parents weren't just selfish. They were scared, desperate, and, in their way, trying to hold our family together. It didn't excuse them, but it complicated my anger. One evening, I found myself scrolling through old family photos, the ones Grandma had kept in a big battered album. I realized something. I had spent my whole life defending my parents emotionally, even when they were wrong. Now I had to decide whether to continue protecting them or to step back and protect myself. The hardest part was realizing that I wasn't just angry at them for selling the house. I was grieving the idea that family isn't always what you think it is. People you trust can make choices that hurt you in ways that aren't easily fixed. Still, I knew I couldn't let this go quietly. I started looking into legal options, not because I wanted to fight, but because I wanted clarity. Was there any way to recover part of the inheritance? Any way to hold them accountable without destroying what remained of our family? The more I learned, the more complicated it got. Grandma's will had been poorly worded. There were clauses that left some interpretation up to the executor. My parents had exploited those clauses. They hadn't committed fraud in the legal sense, but morally, they were guilty as sin. I felt like I was living in two worlds at once, one of betrayal and rage, and one of reluctant understanding. My parents were flawed, desperate people, but they were also my parents, and I didn't want to lose them completely. I made a decision that night. I would confront them again, but this time with a different goal. I wasn't going to scream or accuse. I was going to demand transparency. I needed to understand the full scope of their decisions, the debts, the financial mistakes, everything. And I needed to make it clear that trust, once broken, was not easily mended. I drafted a list of questions. It felt almost like preparing for a courtroom, but it was just me, trying to navigate a family that had become a stranger to me. I didn't know what would happen when I sat down with them. I didn't know if they'd cry, get defensive, or shut down entirely. All I knew was was that I needed the truth, and I needed it now. Because this wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about whether my family could survive the choices they had made, and whether I could survive the betrayal. I decided to confront my parents again, but this time, I forced myself to calm down before walking into their apartment. I didn't want another shouting match. I needed answers, and I needed them to be honest. I made a mental list of everything I wanted to know: the debts, the loans, the reasoning behind selling the house, and why they hadn't even bothered to discuss it with me. When I arrived, the apartment smelled faintly of burnt toast and coffee, like it always did. My parents were sitting on the couch, looking nervous. I could see my mom fidgeting with the hem of her sweater, and my dad avoiding eye contact with a look I'd never seen on him before. Guilt, maybe even shame. I need to know everything, I said, taking a seat across from them. I want the full story: the debts, the loans, why you sold Grandma's house, why you didn't tell me. They exchanged a glance. My dad sighed heavily, finally speaking. It's a lot. We didn't want to drag you into it because we thought it would stress you out. Stress me out? I lived with Grandma. I helped her every weekend. I took care of that house, I said, my voice tight. You think I wouldn't want to know? Mom finally spoke, voice trembling. We were in way over our heads. Credit cards, medical bills, car loans, the apartment, it all piled up. One day, it just felt like drowning. I leaned back, trying to absorb it. You sold it because you were drowning, not because you wanted to hurt me? Dad nodded. Yes, but we did hurt you. We knew that, and we're sorry, Ayan, truly. I felt my anger waver, replaced by a heavy sadness. They hadn't done this out of malice. They had done it out of desperation, thinking it was the only way to keep the family from falling apart. But still, it didn't erase the betrayal. I asked them to go over every debt. They handed me a folder of paperwork, letters from banks, unpaid bills, credit card statements. The numbers were staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars in debt. Some of it from past medical emergencies, some from living beyond their means, some from loans they took out without thinking. Grandma's house had been the only asset that could cover it without leaving them bankrupt. As I flipped through the papers, I felt a strange mix of sympathy and rage. They had been reckless, yes, but they were also trapped. The more I saw, the more I understood why they had done what they did, but understanding didn't mean forgiving. I wish you had talked to me, I said finally. Even if you were desperate, I could have helped figure something out. We could have sold it together or found another solution. Instead, you took it from me and made the decision for me. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We were afraid, Ayan. Afraid that if we asked, you would refuse, and then we'd be left with nothing. We made a terrible mistake thinking we could protect you by keeping you in the dark. I didn't know what to say. Their fear was real. Their desperation was real. And yet, so was my grief. That house represented everything I had worked for. Not just the physical property, but the trust, the love, the bond with Grandma. That was gone, even if I understood why. We sat in silence for a while. The apartment felt smaller somehow, weighed down by all the unspoken regrets and confessions. I realized that my parents weren't the villains I had imagined. They were just flawed humans, making terrible choices under impossible circumstances. I need time, I said finally. I need time to process all of this. I can't just pretend everything is okay. Dad nodded slowly. We get that, and we're willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild your trust. It wasn't easy to hear. Rebuilding trust would take years, and maybe some things could never be fixed. But at least for the first time, I felt like we were on the same page. They weren't hiding anything anymore. They were facing the consequences of their choices, and I was facing the consequences of mine, whether to hold on to anger or try to find some peace. Over the next few days, I went back to the house's neighborhood again. I watched the new owners move in, the movers carrying boxes and furniture. I felt a pang in my chest, but it was different now, more like grief than rage. The house would never be mine, but I could carry the memories with me. I started thinking about Grandma's words. Life is messy, but you'll find your way. Love. She had known this would hurt, and maybe she had hoped I'd learn to navigate betrayal and disappointment without letting it destroy me. I also realized that family isn't always about fairness. It's about survival, about making it through the mess together, even if the mess is caused by people you love. My parents had failed me in one way, but in another, they had tried to protect the rest of the family from collapsing completely. It didn't make what they did okay, but it did give me a perspective I hadn't had before. People I love can make mistakes that feel irreparable, but sometimes understanding the reasons behind those mistakes is the first step toward forgiveness. That week, I sat down with my parents again, not to fight, but to plan. We went over the finances, made a list of priorities, and started a plan to fix things without further destruction. I was still angry, still hurt, but at least I felt like we were moving forward instead of just treading water in a sea of resentment. I realized that my inheritance wasn't just the house. It was the bond I had with my grandmother, the lessons she taught me, and the resilience I had built by caring for her. The house was gone, but her love wasn't. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start rebuilding something, even if it wasn't exactly what I had expected. For the first time in weeks, I slept that night feeling a little lighter. The anger hadn't disappeared, and the trust wasn't fully restored, but at least I had the full picture. And sometimes knowing the truth is the first step toward healing, even if that truth hurts like hell. After finally talking to my parents, I thought some of the tension would ease. I was wrong. The real challenge started when the news of Grandma's house reached the rest of the family. Apparently, word had spread faster than I expected. Cousins, aunts, and even distant relatives started calling, texting, and dropping by with comments that ranged from sympathetic to outright judgmental. I still remember the call from my oldest cousin, Jenna. Ayan, she said, voice sharp and trembling with excitement. Did you hear? Mom and Dad sold Grandma's house? I can't believe they did that without telling you. I know, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. I've been dealing with it. Dealing with it? She scoffed. They basically stole it from you. You should do something. Her words made my chest tighten. It was easy to call call them thieves from across the state, safe behind a phone, but living through the betrayal was another story. I was still in the raw middle of grief, still processing everything with my parents, still trying to understand their reasoning. And it wasn't just Jenna. Everyone had an opinion. Some thought I was naive for not fighting immediately. Others blamed my parents for being irresponsible, and a few even implied that I should just let it go to maintain family harmony. I felt trapped between two extremes: anger at my parents and pressure from the rest of the family to act decisively. The first family gathering after the sale was almost unbearable. My parents tried to be normal, smiling through small talk, but the tension was palpable. I could see the whispers and sideways glances. Cousins were subtle at first, a raised eyebrow here, a quiet comment there, but eventually it became impossible to ignore. "Poor Ayan," one cousin said under her breath as I walked by. "They really did you dirty." I wanted to scream, to tell everyone to mind their own business, but instead I took a deep breath and walked away. Grandma's house had always been a sanctuary, a quiet place where I could escape the drama. Now every interaction felt like stepping into a courtroom. One afternoon, I decided to confront Jenna directly. I needed her to understand my perspective. "Look," I said, sitting on the park bench we used to hang out on as kids, "I know you think this is black and white, but it's not. I'm still processing everything. I know why they did it, and it doesn't make it okay, but I can't just act like a bomb has to go off in the family to get revenge." She stared at me, shocked. You're defending them?" "I'm trying to understand them," I said softly. "I still love them, even though I'm hurt. That doesn't mean I agree, and it doesn't mean I've forgiven them yet." Her eyes softened a little, but I could still feel her judgment. It made me realize that family expectations are often heavier than grief itself. People want neat answers, immediate outrage, and instant justice. Real life doesn't work that way. At home, my parents were still overwhelmed. They apologized repeatedly, and we kept going over the finances, trying to come up with a plan to rebuild stability. I started keeping a spreadsheet of bills, income, and what needed to be addressed first. It was exhausting, but it gave me a small sense of control. Meanwhile, extended family kept poking at the situation. Some were subtly blaming me, implying that I should have known better or anticipated the sale. Others were outright criticizing my parents, which only added tension. I realized quickly that no one in the family truly wanted to understand the situation. They wanted drama, and Grandma's house had become the center of it. I had to create boundaries. I stopped responding to some calls and texts. I told aunts and cousins that I needed space to process things with my parents before dealing with outside opinions. It didn't make me popular, but it gave me breathing room. The most surprising reaction came from my youngest cousin, Leo. He was 18 and had always been quiet, mostly ignored in family dynamics. One day, he texted me, "I know what they did was messed up, but maybe they had no choice." Just thought I'd say, "I get why you're frustrated." It was small, but it felt like validation. Maybe it wasn't about everyone agreeing with me. Maybe it was about finding those few who could see both sides, the messy, human truth behind the betrayal. At one point, my mom pulled me aside. "Ayan," she said quietly, "I don't know if the family will ever understand why we did this, but you need to decide how you want to handle them. You don't have to keep fighting. You don't have to forgive. You just have to choose what keeps you sane." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about Grandma's house anymore. It was about learning to navigate a family that could be supportive one moment and suffocating the next. It was about finding peace in chaos. I spent a long night thinking about everything: Grandma's words, my parents' desperation, the reactions of cousins and aunts, my own grief. The anger hadn't disappeared and the betrayal still burned, but I realized that part of moving forward was deciding what battles were worth fighting and which ones I could let go of. I couldn't reclaim the house. I couldn't erase the sale or undo the betrayal, but I could decide how much power it had over me. That realization was both terrifying and liberating. By the end of the week, I started taking small steps. I limited family interactions to neutral settings, focused on helping my parents rebuild stability, and allowed myself moments to grieve Grandma's house privately. For the first time, I felt like I was regaining some control. Still, the ripple effect of the betrayal wasn't over. Family whispers continued. Small jabs and subtle critiques lingered. I had to remind myself daily that this wasn't a war I could win with anger. It was a lesson in navigating messy human relationships, and in recognizing that sometimes the hardest part isn't the betrayal itself, but everyone else's reaction to it. And somewhere in all of it, I started to understand that forgiveness, whether for my parents, for my family, or even for myself, that wouldn't come quickly. It would be slow, messy, and probably uncomfortable, but it was the only way to survive this without losing myself entirely. After weeks of dealing with family gossip, whispers, and judgment, I realized that I couldn't let the situation define me entirely. Grandma's house was gone, and my parents had betrayed my trust, but my life didn't have to stop there. I needed to focus on me, my future, my independence, and my own sense of home. I started small. I cleaned my apartment top to bottom, organizing things that had been gathering dust for months. It felt symbolic, reclaiming space in my life that was mine and mine alone. Each shelf I tidied, each drawer I sorted, felt like a tiny act of control over a situation where I'd felt powerless. Work became another anchor. I threw myself into projects at the marketing firm where I worked, volunteering for initiatives I normally wouldn't touch. The distraction wasn't about running away. It was about proving to myself that I could create stability in at least one part of my life. One evening, while reviewing reports, I received a call from my best friend, Sarah. "Hey, how are you holding up?" she asked. I laughed softly, a little bitter, a little tired. "I'm surviving. Still feel like my life got hijacked, but I'm trying." "Good," she said firmly, "because you can't let this house thing define you forever. It's gone. What matters now is what you do next." Her words hit me hard because she was right. Grandma's house had been more than walls and a roof. It had been safety, love, and a sense of belonging. But it wasn't the only thing that could give me those things. I had friends, work, a community, and importantly, my own resilience. I started looking at apartments in neighborhoods I'd never considered before, places where I could create my own sense of home without the weight of family history looming over me. I even started a small savings plan, not a massive one, but enough to slowly build toward security that no one could take away from me. Therapy helped too. I hadn't really processed the grief and betrayal properly. Talking to someone who didn't have a stake in the family drama allowed me to unpack my feelings without judgment. I realized that a lot of my anger wasn't just about the house. It was about trust, about feeling safe with the people who were supposed to protect me, and about losing a physical reminder of my grandmother. At one session, I said aloud something I hadn't admitted even to myself. I feel like I failed Grandma by letting them sell her house without stopping them. My therapist shook her head gently. You didn't fail her, Ayan. You honored her by caring for her, by being there. The house being sold isn't a reflection of your loyalty or love. Those words stayed with me. I began writing letters, not to send, just to get my thoughts out, addressed to Grandma, to my parents, and even to myself. Writing helped me confront the betrayal, articulate my grief, and explore my mixed feelings of anger, compassion, and sorrow. Slowly, I started reconnecting with other parts of my life I had neglected. I signed up for a painting class I'd wanted to try for years. I joined a local running group. I even started volunteering at a community center on weekends. Each new activity reminded me that life could still be beautiful, even if it wasn't perfect. One weekend, I visited the old neighborhood. I walked past Grandma's former house again, now fully occupied by the new owners. Instead of the stabbing grief that had gripped me before, there was a softer ache. I remembered the happy mornings, the laughter, and the smell of cookies cooling on the counter. That house would always belong to my memories, even if it didn't belong to me physically. I texted my parents afterward, something I hadn't done in weeks. I walked by the house today. I still miss it, but I'm trying to move forward. Mom replied almost immediately. Thank you, Ayan. We know we hurt you. I hope we can rebuild trust slowly, day by day. It wasn't a clean resolution. Trust takes time. But acknowledging that the first small steps toward healing were possible gave me a sense of relief. I also started setting firm boundaries with extended family. I stopped engaging in conversations that revolved around the house. I didn't need approval or commentary from anyone else. The focus was on my life now, not on a past I couldn't change. And then, something surprising happened. A few of my cousins, including Leo, started asking for advice about budgeting, about handling family disputes, about making tough decisions. It was strange, but gratifying. Somehow, my experience with the betrayal had turned into a kind of inadvertent mentorship. I could help them navigate pitfalls I'd already faced. For the first time in months, I laughed freely at a family dinner. It felt tentative, like a small bridge between the past and what I was building for myself. I didn't pretend the house hadn't been lost, or that my anger and grief were completely gone, but I could feel myself stepping out of the shadows of betrayal and into my own life. Grandma's voice still echoes in my head sometimes. Life is messy, but you'll find your way. I think she knew that her house being gone wouldn't stop me. What mattered was how I carried her lessons, love, care, resilience, into my own life. I'm not naive. I know the scars of this will last a long time. I know there will be moments when the betrayal hits me again, like a sudden gust of wind, but I'm learning that I don't have to let it define me. I can grieve, I can be angry, I can forgive partially, and I can reclaim the parts of myself that were lost in the chaos. This part of the story isn't about revenge or victory. It's about survival, about reclaiming agency over my life. And for the first time since Grandma passed, I feel a sense of cautious hope. I don't have the house, but I have something perhaps more enduring. The knowledge that I can create my own home, my own life, and my own sense of security, one day at a time. Even after I had started reclaiming my own life, the extended family drama refused to die down. Every time there was a family gathering, whispers about Grandma's house seemed unavoidable. Some relatives made subtle digs like, I guess some of us weren't as invested in keeping the house. Or, well, Ayan, I suppose we all have to learn to let go eventually. At first, I tried to ignore it. I smiled politely, nodded, and engaged in neutral conversation. But every sideways comment felt like a tiny jab at my chest. It wasn't the house itself anymore. It was the constant reminder that people were judging me for how I responded to a betrayal I didn't cause. One Saturday, my Aunt Carol cornered me after a family barbecue. Ayan, she said, voice sharp, don't you think it's time you let the whole thing go? Your parents have apologized. The house is sold. Why keep making a scene? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my anger in check. Aunt Carol, I said slowly, I'm not trying to make a scene. I'm just living my life. The house is gone, yes, but my feelings aren't invalid. I'm allowed to process betrayal at my own pace. Her eyes narrowed. Well, it just seems like you're holding a grudge. Family isn't supposed to be this tense. I clenched my fists under my skirt. Family isn't perfect, I said. Sometimes people hurt each other. Sometimes they make terrible choices. That doesn't mean I have to pretend it didn't happen. And it doesn't mean I have to let anyone else dictate how I handle my own grief. Carol blinked, clearly caught off guard. She didn't respond and walked away, but I felt a surge of relief. I had finally said it out loud. I was drawing my first firm boundary. The next few weeks were a test of this new resolve. Calls and texts came from relatives wanting updates on family finances, or subtle hints about how I should smooth things over with my parents. I politely declined or didn't respond at all. Each time, it felt like a small victory, proof that I was reclaiming control over my own life. Meanwhile, my parents noticed a shift in me. I was more independent, more focused on myself rather than the constant family drama. They weren't used to it. Dad commented one evening, "You've changed, Ayan. You're stronger somehow." I smiled faintly. I had to. I couldn't let everything break me. Mom nodded, tears in her eyes. I'm proud of you, even though I know we hurt you. You're handling this better than we ever could have hoped. It was a bittersweet acknowledgement. They didn't fix the past, but they recognized the person I was becoming. And I realized that this was what I needed most. Recognition, not apologies, and space to grow beyond the mess of betrayal. I also started being more selective about who I let into my inner circle. Friends who had supported me through the aftermath became even closer. I confided in them about the lingering resentment from distant relatives, about the struggles with my parents' decisions, and about my own guilt over feeling angry while understanding their desperation. It helped to voice it all aloud. Hearing someone else validate my feelings, that it was okay to be upset, that it was okay to prioritize my own peace, gave me a new sense of agency. I didn't have to carry the weight of family expectations on top of my grief. One day, while walking through the park near Grandma's old house, I noticed a small community garden that had been set up. I joined as a volunteer, digging, planting, and tending to flowers alongside strangers and neighbors. It was peaceful work, quiet and grounding. For the first time in months, I felt like I was planting something that was entirely my own. Not a house, not an inheritance, just life, growing slowly under my own hands. I realized that boundaries weren't just about shutting people out. They were about creating space to grow, space to breathe, to think, and to rebuild. Every firm no to gossip, every polite refusal to engage in family judgment. Every step I took toward independence was a tiny seed in that garden. At home, I started implementing routines that reinforced my independence. I cooked meals I enjoyed, decorated my apartment to reflect my personality, and even started small home projects I had postponed for years. Each act was symbolic, a reminder that I could create a life filled with comfort and ownership, even if the physical house from my grandmother's estate was gone. Even so, there were moments of doubt. Walking past the old neighborhood or hearing a family member comment on the house could trigger grief and frustration all over again. But I began to notice a pattern. When I allowed myself to feel fully and then refocus on my own life, the pain lost some of its sharpness. It became a memory, not a prison. By the end of the month, I realized something crucial. The betrayal had forced me to define my own version of family and home. It wasn't about property, inheritance, or keeping up appearances. It was about relationships I could trust, boundaries I could enforce, and personal growth I could nurture. Grandma's house had been lost, yes, but the lessons she had given me, love, resilience, empathy, and strength, were mine forever. And for the first time, I felt ready to embrace them fully, without letting anger or grief dictate my actions toward others or myself. I wasn't completely healed. I knew resentment would linger, and trust with some family members might never fully return. But I had taken a step toward reclaiming my autonomy, setting boundaries, and understanding that healing didn't mean forgetting or forgiving completely. It meant moving forward with awareness, strength, and self-respect. And slowly, I was beginning to feel that life, messy as it was, could still be mine, in a way that no betrayal could ever take away. Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding my relationship with my parents, but this time on my own terms. I started scheduling weekly dinners at my apartment instead of going over to theirs. It gave me a sense of control, a buffer that allowed me to engage without being overwhelmed by past betrayals or the lingering judgment of extended family. During one of these dinners, I finally felt able to speak more openly than I had since the house was sold. I looked at my parents across the table, my hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, I said slowly. I'm still angry. I'm still hurt. But I also understand why you did what you did. I can't undo it, and I can't pretend it didn't happen. But I want to figure out a way for us to move forward without letting this define every interaction. My mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Ayan, that's all we want to. We can't take back the past, but we want to do better. For you and for ourselves. Dad nodded, his voice softer than I had heard in months. We'll rebuild your trust slowly. We know it will take time, and we don't expect instant forgiveness. But we'll be honest with you from now on. No more secrets, no more hiding anything. It wasn't a magical fix. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. But hearing them say it, seeing the sincerity in their eyes was a balm for my grief. I realized that closure wasn't about erasing the pain or pretending the betrayal didn't happen. It was about acknowledging it, understanding it, and deciding how to live with it in a way that allowed life to continue. I began setting clear expectations with my parents. No financial decisions would be made without transparency. No secrets. No half-truths. If they ever felt desperate again, we would discuss options openly. It felt awkward at first, like negotiating boundaries with people who had parented me my entire life, but it was necessary. I needed to reclaim agency over the way our family operated. Meanwhile, I continued nurturing the life I was building outside the family drama. I finished my first small painting for a local exhibit, something I had started months ago, but had abandoned during the chaos. I joined a book club, met new people, and spent weekends in the park volunteering. These small acts reminded me that I had a life beyond the betrayal, a life that I could fill with purpose, beauty, and connection. One evening, as I was walking home from a gallery event, I stopped near Grandma's old street. The house was quiet, the new owner's lights glowing softly inside. I felt a pang of loss, but it was gentler now, tinged with nostalgia rather than rage. I realized that the house would never truly leave me. It existed in my memories, in the lessons my grandmother had taught me, and in the resilience I had built. I called my mom afterward. I walked past the street tonight, I said. I can't go inside anymore, and I probably never will, but I wanted you to know I'm okay. I'm starting to feel like myself again. Her voice was soft, almost choked. Thank you, Ayan. That means more than you know. We're proud of you. It was the first time time since all this began that I felt a sense of peace around them. Not perfect peace, but a steady, measured calm that suggested we could exist together without constant conflict. I also started reconnecting with extended family on my own terms. Instead of engaging in every conversation about the house, I focused on relationships that mattered, setting clear boundaries with anyone who brought negativity or judgment into my life. Some relatives understood, some didn't, but I stopped letting their opinions dictate my emotional state. One particularly enlightening moment came when Leo, my youngest cousin, called me. "I just want to say, I've learned a lot watching you handle all of this," he said. "I hope someday I can be that calm under pressure." I laughed softly. "You'll get there. It's messy, but it's worth it." That conversation made me realize something crucial. My experience with betrayal and grief wasn't just about loss. It was about learning how to navigate life when the people you love make mistakes. It was about developing empathy, resilience, and the ability to stand firm without letting anger consume you. At home, I continued personal projects. I redecorated my apartment with small touches that reminded me of Grandma: a lavender-scented candle, a cozy corner for reading, a small garden on the balcony. I was creating a home that felt mine, independent of the past, independent of my parents' decisions. It wasn't a replacement for the house I lost, but it was something I could control completely. Therapy sessions helped me articulate these feelings. My therapist suggested I write a letter to my grandmother, even if I never sent it. I did. In it, I thanked her for trusting me, for loving me, and for teaching me resilience. I told her I was sorry I couldn't honor her house in the way she wanted, but I promised to carry her lessons forward. Writing the letter was strangely cathartic. For the first time, I felt like I was closing a chapter in my life, not erasing it, but acknowledging it fully and letting go of some of the pain that had held me captive. I realized that closure didn't mean forgiving completely or forgetting. It meant accepting the complexity of people, my parents, my extended family, even myself, and finding a way to move forward that preserved my peace and integrity. By the end of that month, I felt stronger. Not invincible, not unhurt, but capable of facing the future with clarity. I had redefined what home meant to me, what family could be, and what boundaries I needed to maintain my well-being. And for the first time since Grandma's house was sold, I felt a sense of calm determination. Life was messy, as she had always said, but I was finding my way through it. I didn't have the house, but I had something arguably more important: control over my own life, my choices, and the peace I was building one day at a time. By the time part 9 rolled around in my life, if life could be neatly divided like that, I was starting to feel like myself again. Not the naive, trusting version of me who assumed family would always do right by me, but a stronger, more grounded version. I had learned to navigate betrayal, grief, and disappointment, and it was time to take that growth and turn it into something constructive. One of the first steps was my living space. I had been renting a small apartment, and while functional, it hadn't felt like home yet. I began repainting, adding small decorations that reminded me of Grandma, but also reflected my own tastes: soft blues, warm wood tones, and a tiny collection of potted plants. Each plant felt symbolic, something living I could nurture entirely on my own. Work also became a central focus. I took on more responsibility at the marketing firm, volunteering to lead projects and mentor new hires. It wasn't about impressing anyone else. It was about proving to myself that I could rely on my own skills, that I could create stability and success independent of my family's chaos. Every late night spent organizing campaigns, every client meeting I led successfully, felt like reclaiming a piece of my agency. Socially, I began cultivating a life that wasn't dominated by family drama. Friends became my chosen family. Weekend trips, quiet nights cooking together, impromptu movie marathons. These were the moments that reminded me that connection didn't have to be tied to betrayal or judgment. I also started attending a weekly meditation and mindfulness class, something I'd scoffed at before. It helped me center myself and manage the lingering anxiety that popped up whenever I thought about Grandma's house or extended family opinions. One weekend, I took a day trip to visit a lake I used to go to with Grandma. Walking along the shore, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized I'd been craving. The sun sparkled on the water, the air smelled of pine and fresh earth, and I thought about everything that had happened in the last few months: the betrayal, the anger, the grief, and the slow, painful rebuilding. I realized that independence wasn't just about money or living alone. It was about emotional autonomy. It was about being able to feel, process, and act without letting the chaos of others' mistakes dictate my state of mind. Grandma had taught me this in subtle ways, through her patience and resilience. I was finally starting to internalize it. Around that time, my parents noticed the shift too. They weren't just apologizing anymore. They were watching me reclaim my life with a mix of pride and quiet regret. My dad commented one evening as we had dinner together, "You've grown so much, Ayan. I can't imagine what you'd have been like if we hadn't complicated things." I smiled faintly. "Complicated things happen, Dad. We can't change that, but I can control what I do now." Mom nodded. "And we'll continue supporting you however you need. We just hope you know that, even if we failed in the past." Her words were comforting, but I knew the real test was my own commitment to myself. I couldn't rely on apologies or promises to rebuild my sense of security. I had to actively create it, day by day. Financial independence became a priority too. I opened a savings account specifically for future investments, not for a house like Grandma's, but for opportunities that I could control entirely: travel, education, and long-term stability. I even met with a financial advisor, something I'd never considered before. It was empowering to plan for a future that wasn't tethered to past mistakes or family obligations. I also began making peace with the house itself. I walked past it occasionally, noticing how the new owners had made it their own. At first it stung, but over time, I saw it as a reminder of life's life's impermanence. Nothing stays the same. And sometimes, the best way to honor something lost is to carry its lessons forward, rather than try to reclaim the physical object. One evening, I gathered my closest friends for a small dinner party. As we laughed, shared stories, and toasted to new beginnings, I realized something profound. I was building a life that didn't revolve around loss or betrayal. It revolved around connection, growth, and choice. Every friendship, every small achievement, every mindful decision to care for myself was a brick in the foundation of my independence. Even extended family began noticing the change. Some were surprised, some skeptical, but I stopped caring about their opinions. What mattered was my life, not their judgments. I had learned to filter out the noise, to focus on what nourished me and protected my well-being. I began journaling daily, reflecting on everything that had happened and everything I was building. I wrote about grief, yes, but also about joy, hope, and small victories. Each entry was a reminder that while I couldn't undo the past, I could shape the future. Grandma's lessons, resilience, love, patience, were embedded in these pages, guiding me quietly but persistently. By the end of that month, I felt like I had reached a turning point. The betrayal wasn't just something I survived, it had become a catalyst for growth. I had developed emotional strength, boundaries, independence, and a clear vision for my life. The anger, while still occasionally flaring, was no longer a prison. It was a teacher. Grandma's voice echoed in my mind, soft but steady. Life is messy, but you'll find your way. And I had. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably, I was finding my way. I didn't need the house to define me. I didn't need approval from anyone. I had myself, my choices, and a life I was actively building, step by step. And that, I realized, was more enduring than any inheritance or property. It took months, but eventually, I felt a sense of equilibrium settle over my life. The anger and grief were still there sometimes, flickering unexpectedly like shadows, but I no longer allowed them to dictate my every thought. I had learned that betrayal could hurt, yes, but it didn't have to define me forever. One morning, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about Grandma's house in weeks. Not with pain, not with anger. Instead, I remembered her smile, the way she tucked her scarf just so before heading out to the garden, the warmth of her voice when she told me stories. The memories were alive, comforting, and entirely mine. The house itself had faded into the background, no longer a symbol of loss, but of lessons learned. I called my mom later that day. I feel lighter, I said, hesitating because it almost felt strange to admit. I don't think about the house the same way anymore. I feel like I can breathe again. Her voice cracked with emotion. Oh, Ayan, that's all we ever wanted for you. We're so proud of you. Even Dad, who was usually stoic, said simply, we failed in one way, but you've turned it into something incredible. We've watched you grow through this. Their words were affirming, but I knew my growth didn't hinge on their approval. It came from within, from navigating betrayal, confronting difficult emotions, and choosing every day to prioritize my own life and well-being. I continued building my life deliberately. I painted more, each brushstroke a reminder that I could create something beautiful even from a painful past. I volunteered at the community center, mentoring teens who were struggling with family issues, realizing that sharing my story could help them navigate their own challenges. Each time a young person said, "Thank you for listening," I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months, maybe even years. Work continued to thrive too. I took on a leadership role in a project that challenged me creatively and strategically. Success no longer felt like a competition with my family or a means of reclaiming power. It felt like proof that I could define my life entirely on my own terms. Occasionally, I ran into distant relatives at events. Some tried to pry, to insert comments about the house, the sale, or how I had handled everything, but I had learned to respond calmly, firmly, and without guilt. I've moved forward, I said simply when asked, and in most cases that ended the conversation. I realized that setting boundaries wasn't just about anger. It was about reclaiming my autonomy, my right to control my narrative. Even my friendships deepened. I had intentionally surrounded myself with people who uplifted me, who understood the nuances of betrayal and growth. They became my chosen family, the people who reminded me that loyalty, love, and care didn't have to be complicated or destructive. With them, I could celebrate victories, grieve losses, and plan for the future without fear of judgment. One quiet evening, I sat on my balcony, a cup of tea in hand, looking at the city lights below. I reflected on the past months, the shock of betrayal, the confrontations with my parents, the gossip and judgment from relatives, and the slow, painstaking process of reclaiming myself. Each stage had been painful, but each had also taught me something invaluable: resilience, empathy, boundary setting, and the importance of personal agency. I realized that Grandma's legacy wasn't the house. It was her love, her wisdom, and her quiet strength that could never be taken from me. She had prepared me, in ways I hadn't understood at the time, to handle life's unpredictability and the imperfections of the people around me. And I had lived up to that in my own imperfect, messy, and human way. In the end, I understood that betrayal, as painful as it is, can be a catalyst for growth. It forces you to examine relationships, set boundaries, and prioritize your own mental and emotional health. I didn't need the house to validate my love for Grandma or my sense of family. I didn't need revenge to reclaim power. I needed clarity, resilience, and the courage to move forward. I wrote a final letter, not to send, but to close the chapter formally in my own mind. I thanked my parents for their honesty, acknowledged their mistakes, and affirmed my commitment to my own life. I told Grandma that I carried her wisdom with me every day. I promised myself that I would continue building a life rooted in love, trust, and self-respect. Looking back, the pain of betrayal will always be part of my story, but it no longer defines the narrative. It is a chapter, and significant, yes, and shaping, yes, but not the whole book. The rest is mine to write, filled with choices that reflect my values, my ambitions, and my sense of peace. Sometimes at night, I think about the old neighborhood and Grandma's house. I smile softly, remembering the warmth inside those walls, the lessons learned in small everyday moments, and the love that shaped me. The house itself may no longer be mine, but the foundation it gave me, the resilience, the strength, and the ability to navigate life with courage, is something no one can ever take away. I am not unscarred. I am not unhurt, but I am independent, self-aware, and for the first time in a long time, truly at peace. I have learned that family, home, and security are not always about property or perfection. They are about love, boundaries, and the courage to keep moving forward even when life is messy. And so I move forward, not as someone defined by betrayal, but as someone strengthened by it, carrying memories, lessons, and love that no one can sell, no one can betray, and no one can take away. The end.